Hey guys, Dee here with Cleaning Cash Flow, and today we are here with Susan Zeme.
So I'm an employment lawyer. I represent small businesses, and among them are domestic referral agencies. I've been doing this work as an employment lawyer for about 30 years, and I've been working with domestic referral agencies for 15 plus years,
Right.
I would say. In terms of domestic referral agencies, I help them get set up. I help them prepare their documentation. I represent them through audits or worker claims. And I do want to just be clear that our conversation today is for general informational purposes. We are not specifically creating an attorney-client relationship, and I can't, from this distance, answer anybody's specific questions, but I'd be happy to do that at a later time on a more individual basis.
Perfect. Yes. And actually, how I met Susan was she was a speaker at a workshop for the California Coalition of Domestic Referral Agencies. And so, if you guys don't know what that organization is or what they do, I highly recommend you look into it. They're a nonprofit organization that really helps spell out how to operate as a domestic referral agency in the state of California. And so you were there, and it was really great to have Susan, and I've worked with her. I really rely on her to help me understand how to break down the laws and do things the right way so that A, I don't get in trouble doing that, or B, that if under a sticky situation, we are steering clear of, failing audits. Really.
Exactly.
The questions that we have that pop up a lot in our Facebook group or with subscribers, those are where we're pulling these questions from. So with regards to being in compliance with independent contractor laws, they tend to involve both federal and state. What are the conflicts, if any, between the state of California and the IRS guidelines for classifying independent contractors?
There are differences between the guidelines as state and federal law break them down. However, in California, we tend to concentrate on just the state guidelines. Right. They cover everything, and even though the federal IRS guideline lists more factors that a business needs to take a look at, they're really all included within the California independent contractor test.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's any conflict, there's just more detail in the federal. And so for our purposes in California, we're good if we comply with the California test.
Right. In California, do domestic referral agency have to submit a DE 542 annually in addition to the first time?
No, my understanding of that is that's a form that the EDD requires to identify a new independent contractor,
right,
so that they can flag that person in the event that they have child support obligations.
Right.
And once the form is initially filed, there's no more ongoing obligation.
Great. And what type of services is most commonly referred out for DRAs besides house cleaning? Are there any domestic services you don't recommend DRAs refer out?
So the two most common types of services that I see are house cleaning and caregiving.
Yeah.
I don't see and should not see any type of service that requires a lot of specific and individual supervision or training or control, because that would be in conflict with the referral agency requirements.
Right.
So you would not see, for example, a nanny, but you might see a carpet cleaner or a window washer, which I look at sort of as part of house cleaning.
Yeah, and that's a lot of, what our folks want to know too is if we refer out house cleaners, can we also do very similar target markets like carpet cleaning or even window washing or maybe sometimes landscaping? Those are in-home work, domestic work, and that seems like that should be okay.
Yes, that should be okay. And you sort of implicitly raised the point there that one thing that is necessary is that it be domestic.
Right.
It be done in the client's home as opposed to an office or a business.
Yes. And that is actually a lot of, I think, areas that domestic referral agencies knowingly or unknowingly are doing that wrong is they accept commercial clients like janitorial work, and actually that is not a part of a domestic referral agency.
That's correct.
Business. Yep. And then another question, of course, is cleaners that, because they are independent and we cannot train or control their work, we run into situations where in our industry we find a lot is if a cleaner shows up late without calling a client in advance or cancels late on the same day they might be out sick. And for when a client does that, we have late cancel fees within a reasonable period of time. So can we do that, kind of reverse towards the cleaner, that if they, cancel late on a client, that we can charge a late fee and that, or give the client a credit for a late fee essentially, and that they would inherit the percentage that they would normally earn?
Yes, absolutely, as long as that is spelled out clearly in the written agreement with the cleaner.
Yeah. Yeah, and because, for me, that's really, it puts me in a bind as a referral agency to say, hey, to the client, hey, we charge you late fees, but, oh, too bad when the cleaner doesn't show. So that's good to know. Okay, so with regards to transitioning, as a business experienced the struggle of operating an employee-based company and are looking to properly transition to a domestic referral agency, much like I did, and that was my experience, what would you say is the best approach?
The best approach is to close down the employee-based agency and open a new domestic referral agency.
Yeah.
You want to be very, very clear that there's no crossover or commingling between the two businesses, and also no confusion by the workers. You want the workers and the clients, for that matter, to be very clear that once they start with a domestic referral agency, they're no longer employees.
Yeah.
But it's a completely different business and business model.
Yes. And in fact, I believe the class code for those two businesses are different, even when you set up your EIN number as well. So, that's important to have. Can you, and this is, kind of asking a very similar way, but I just want to make sure that all the questions are answered, is can you keep the same business entity and change your operations, even if, let's say, someone just wants to keep their bank accounts and keep their EIN number the same, but really change all of their operations to suit the new business model? Is that possible?
No.
Yeah.
The simple answer is no. That will create confusion.
That's a no.
That was a no, yes. And specifically, the domestic referral agency needs a different type of name.
Right.
It must say a referral agency in its name.
Right.
It needs different bank accounts. It needs a trust account, which the employee-based business didn't. And no, you need a separate business.
Right. Okay, so moving on to the topic of audits. One of the biggest concerns business owners have is legal compliance and audit. So what events can trigger an audit, and which entities can audit a DRA?
The most common event that I see that triggers an audit is a claim by a worker for unemployment, for example, or workers' compensation or state disability insurance. And that claim may trigger the state agency to come and audit the business. The state agency that's going to audit in those cases would be mostly the Employment Development Department, but it could also come from the Workers' Compensation Insurance Carrier, or the Labor Commissioner, or the Federal Department of Labor.
Yeah. And workers' comp, of course, the workers' comp that you carry for your agency won't extend to the cleaners because they are independent, but if you have office staff, that's the workers' comp that you would be carrying for, and that could...
Exactly.
Yeah. What is the process of an audit?
The process of an audit is typically a letter is sent to the company from the EDD, for example, saying this is a notice of audit. We are going to audit your business. And in the letter, it will request to set up an audit meeting, and it will request that a number of documents be provided to the EDD. I typically get involved at that point if it's a client that I'm working with. And there's also a questionnaire where the EDD will ask a number of questions about how the business is operated. It's very important to answer that questionnaire correctly, which is why I tend to get involved at that point. And then the questionnaire is submitted. The auditor sets up an audit appointment. They typically want to come into the business and meet with the business owner and review documents there. I don't like to do it that way because I'd rather not have the auditor in the business office with unfettered access to everything going on there.
Right.
And so I prefer to bring the documents and whatever we need to the auditor's office.
Yeah.
There's then an audit meeting where we provide a bunch of documents, answer a lot of questions. The auditor makes copies and makes a lot of notes, and then there's generally some follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
They may want to contact some workers.
Mm-hmm.
They'll ask for contact information. They may ask for some follow-up documents,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that they issue a ruling.
Yeah. And for where the meeting takes place, you say that you prefer to have it not at the location of the business. Would you then just request for that? Are you able to request that with the auditor?
Yes, I tell the auditor that we would prefer to bring the documents and come meet with them at their office.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had any complaint or argument about that. We're
Great.
making it easier for them.
Yeah, that's true. And what are the most common things auditors look at to ensure compliance with independent contractor regulations?
The most important thing that the auditor is looking at is control.
Mm-hmm.
The control by the business over the worker. And they'll ask a lot of questions designed to describe to them how much control the business has. They're also going to look at, and this is a really clear and easy one for them to determine, did the business have a trust account?
Mm-hmm.
That is, it's black and white, it's clear, they can look at that and say they're in compliance or they're not. And the most trouble I've had with clients being audited is if they did not have a trust account.
Yeah.
So that's a real red flag.
Okay, what do you see that most DRAs get wrong?
A couple of things happen repeatedly, I would say, that DRAs get wrong. One is the trust account.
Right.
And I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because if you're not doing something like training with you or learning the requirements, it's an easy thing for an agency not to know.
Yeah.
That's required.
Yeah.
And I should have said too that something that auditor is also very concerned about is how is the worker being paid?
Right.
And the trust account is part of that.
Yeah.
And so it's a big focus, and it is something that I see getting wrong quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the other thing is different aspects of the control issue.
Yeah.
Like I've seen some agencies where they thought it was okay to provide training.
Right.
Or they thought it was okay to require that a housekeeper purchase supplies from the agency.
Right.
And that is seen as exerting control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't always talk about the super specifics when we're in our Facebook group, because we're talking to a lot of agency owners throughout the states. But more specifically in California, a lot of these requirements are spelled out for us, which in one way is a really good thing because it's specifically for us to protect us. And so in the link to this video, will link the civil codes that you might want to take a look at. You know, just so you know, that's why I don't always go super into detail, because it's not applicable to everybody who's a subscriber for Cleaning Cash Flow. One of the fears is that even in the event a DRA is operating properly, but an auditor cites incompliance, to appeal this would still cost a fortune, is what we think or assume. Is this true? Is this a valid worry, and how can we prevent that?
I will say, and again, I'm referring to California,
Right.
that the auditors oftentimes are not aware of the legal framework in which the referral agencies operate. And one of the things that I find very helpful is to educate the auditor. And so when I'm working with a client in an audit, I will send a detailed letter citing the civil code and the other applicable laws that explain basically that, at least in California, our domestic referral agencies have an exception from being found to be the employers. So I find educating the auditor very, very helpful. I do think it is much more difficult once the auditor has made a negative finding to come back and change their mind.
Right.
And so many times when I've gotten involved in a process with a client after that's happened, there's a lot of backpedaling, and you have to end up going to the auditor's supervisor, and it's a much higher burden to try and persuade them of compliance at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the answer is really it's best to get it right from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
if at all possible.
Right. Well, I think you already answered this, but the last question regarding this topic of audits is, at what point is it best to consult an attorney?
Well, in my experience, it's best to get some correct information, whether from an attorney or from an organization that knows the law,
Yep.
as soon as possible, even before an audit, when you're setting up your business,
Yeah.
so that hopefully you're doing it all right, and then when an audit comes in, it's not so frightening.
Yeah. All right, so the next topic, representation. So aside from defending against audits, what other scenarios might a referral agency owner find themselves in where legal representation is needed?
Well, like we've been talking about, from the very beginning of setting up a domestic referral agency
Yeah.
is a really great place to get some good advice, because there are numerous legal requirements, at least in California,
Right.
of the written agreement between the agency and the worker has a lot of specific legal requirements.
Mm-hmm.
The communications with clients include some specific legal requirements, and so ideally, I think from the very beginning
Yep.
of setting up an agency,
Yep.
it's great to get some good advice.
Yeah.
And then even if an agency isn't audited by the EDD, for example, things come up, like there may be questions from a worker or a client about how they're being paid, and should I be getting paid overtime, and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And those can turn into problems if not handled appropriately from the beginning.
Yeah. Do you only take California clients, or are you able to help clients in other states too?
So as a California employment lawyer, I am certainly most comfortable representing clients in California, because our employment laws and domestic referral agency laws are very specific.
Right.
I do have some clients that have operations in other states, and in those cases, I typically reach out to my network of other lawyers and find somebody in that state to help.
Perfect. What are some type of cases that you've successfully represented with regards to DRAs?
Well, I've actually had a lot of success.
Yeah.
Representing
That's good to hear
DRAs
for us.
in audits,
Yeah.
especially when I get involved from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found it to be very, very helpful, crucial, really, to educate the auditor. And then once we do that, we get really good results.
Right.
And in addition, I've represented clients in disputes with their workers' comp carriers, which can be very challenging.
Yes.
And I've had success there, but those are difficult,
Yes.
I would say.
Yeah.
And also other cases brought by workers, like if they make a claim for unemployment or overtime, that kind of thing.
Right. Great. If there's one piece of advice you can give a new DRA owner, what would it be?
Get it right from the beginning.
Yeah, I'd say so too. Okay, so these next questions come directly from our subscribers in our Facebook group. I also sent out emails in the past letting you guys know that I will be talking to Susan, so these are some of the questions that came in. Crystal wants to know, in California Civil Code says personal interviews, not in-person interviews. What does that mean? And we kind of talked about this a little bit before our interview session today, so can you speak on that?
I don't believe there's a legal requirement of in-person interviews.
Right.
So from a legal perspective, my understanding is it's okay to interview via FaceTime or Skype or however you do it.
Yeah. And so that, in the electronic age, that lends itself to that other question, would our contracts need to be signed in person?
Yes, and the answer from a practical perspective is no. You can have electronic documents and agreements if that's easier to run your business, but you would need to be able to access them and present them probably in hard copy in the event of an audit or a lawsuit or some question where you need to prove that you've done them all.
Right. Deb W. asks, I've heard the IRS goes to cleaning conventions and warns people that there's no way you can have 1099 workers
in the cleaning industry, you will be penalized. Is this right?
A domestic referral agency can have 1099 workers without being penalized if the agency is operating correctly under the law.
Yeah.
And I'm being specific to California.
Right.
I don't feel like I can confirm that for other
Right.
states. I would say what the IRS is getting at is if an agency is not technically a proper domestic referral agency,
Yeah.
they are going to find those workers to be employees.
Yep. Kenneth asked, if I decide to change my model from employees to independent contractors, how can I go about the change of business without running the risk of having to sell my business and start over? And I think we already covered that.
I think so. You pretty much need a separate business.
You do. And it's better for yourself, your clients, your cleaners, all around.
I agree.
Yeah. John asked, can we have subcontractors or independent contractors sign a non-solicitation and non-compete contract to prevent them from working directly with our customers?
Yes.
And that's also something that Susan would be able to help write properly in your contract as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, that concludes our interview. I really do want to say thank you for your time and supporting the referral agency community. You know, for me, I love working within frameworks, within structure, as long as I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And we're lucky enough in California to have that. So I really appreciate your contribution to that.
My pleasure.
And the other thing too is, you know, as a community, if we stick together and we do it right, you know, I was saying to you earlier too, and it sounded like you agree, is that we make a good image in the public of what we're doing and not have, you know, more attention, negative attention to our industry.
Absolutely, and that's also true from the lawyer's perspective. The more that we send positive images out there to the Employment Development Department or the Labor Commissioner or the workers' comp carriers, the better everybody else in your industry is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you haven't already, go over to cleaningcashflow.com and check out that. I'm going to link the civil codes to this video as well as Susan's contact information, and join the conversation in our Facebook group. Bye!